The World Economic Forum warned us all along. The next two crises, the ones that will make COVID-19 pale in comparison, will be a major cyber attack and climate change. The cyber attack will shut down the entire economy of God knows how many countries. People in hospitals will die. Supermarkets will no longer be supplied. We will all starve or freeze to death. Well, if that is the case, then why on earth are they digitalizing each and every society? Smartphones, smart cities, digital IDs, digital money, the Internet of Things. If all of that is to go down, wouldn't it be wise to have a good old-fashioned backup plan? Maybe not so smart? But that's not what the World Economic Forum presents as a solution to a possible future problem. It is using the same fear-based strategy that has worked for centuries. Present a crisis of unknown precedents, leave it with that so that people can get really scared and turn to their government for help, and then present a solution. Pay more tax. If we all pay more tax, all of the above can be warded off. We, the government, will keep you safe. Just give us your money, comply, and all will be well. Next, climate change. Remember what they said back in the 1970s? 10 years from now, there will be an ice age. Remember what they said 10 years later? 10 years from now, acid rain will destroy all crops. Remember what they said 10 years later? 10 years from now, the ozone layer will be gone. Remember what they said 10 years later? 10 years from now, the ice caps will be gone, melted. What happened to the Ice Age? Those were the experts talking. Remember Al Gore and his inconvenient truth? Alerting the public to an increasing planetary emergency due to global warming back in 2006, plus a sequel in 2017? Well, guess what? None of his terrifying predictions came true. He did win a shared Nobel Prize, though. God knows why. The ice caps are still there. We didn't get submerged in a modern-day deluge. Even the dikes in the Netherlands, a country partly below sea level, still hold, and we're all okay. Then there was John Kerry. He is now US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate and speaker at the World Economic Forum, G7 and G20 meetings, where he shares his heartfelt, humble thoughts and emotions about saving the planet.
We, select group of human beings, are able to sit in a room and come together and actually talk about saving the planet. I mean, it's so almost extraterrestrial to think about. Really, that's where we are.
Oh my God. It's almost extraterrestrial to be talking about saving the planet? Seriously? Well, maybe you shouldn't talk so much about saving the planet. Maybe you should actually do something. I mean, the man is loaded with millions of dollars. Do you know why he and his WEF buddies are still talking about saving the planet instead of acting accordingly? Because fear is needed to bring about extreme reforms that in normal times people will never agree to. Remember?
This is an opportunity to also do good reforms that in normal times people will never agree to.
That's what this is all about. That's why they keep coming up with new so-called catastrophic threats. Those extreme reforms were already introduced during the COVID pandemic. Rules of compliance, decimating our humanity. Total lockdowns of entire communities and countries, destroying trade, killing off small and medium-sized companies, thus creating shortage and poverty. Extreme surveillance measures, annihilating our privacy, and the gathering of biometric data. A very dangerous reform, as we have shown in our previous episode. COVID-19 was an excellent fear inducer. It was implemented to test our ability and willingness to comply. We are now moving to the next level. The cyber attack they keep going on about has been rehearsed 3 times. Cyber Polygon. Just like the COVID pandemic was rehearsed in advance as well. More excellent fear inducers? A new world war against Russia due to the situation in the Ukraine. There was even talk about a possible nuclear war. Excellent choice to scare the living daylight out of people. And of course, the bestseller, climate change and global warming. If people stop being afraid, the Cabal will lose power overnight, you see. That's why climate change has been turned into a major threat. A trump card to push the Great Reset down our throats. Are we climate change deniers? Of course not. Climate change in and of itself is a natural phenomenon. It has existed since time immemorial, ever since the Earth was formed about 4.5 billion years ago. That's why there were ice ages, for instance. Global warming, global cooling. They came and they went. When the ice started melting some 13,000 years ago, were our ancestors to blame? Was it their carbon footprint that caused temperatures to rise? Of course not.
$350 is dangerous. Wow. Are you aware that since mammals have walked the planet, the average has been over 1,000 parts per million?
Yeah, but we weren't walking the planet. We weren't walking the planet. At no point during the past 800,000 years has atmospheric CO2 been as high as it is today.
The reason you chose 800,000 years ago is because for 200 million years before that, it was greater than it is today.
Yeah, but there weren't human beings. I mean, there was a different world, folks. We didn't have 7 billion people.
So how did it get to 2,000 parts per million if we humans weren't here?
Because there were all kinds of geologic events happening on Earth which spewed up.
Did geology stop when we got on the planet?
Climate change will always be a part of planet Earth, with or without people. And global warming? For those are 2 different things, even though they are presented as one. Global warming comes and goes, like we said. Global warming, global cooling. They come in waves. It's normal. So when people ask you about global warming, there's only one valid answer. When? Which wave of global warming are you talking about? The one in the Roman period, when it was actually warmer than today? Oh, the current one. There is no current one. Ever heard of the Little Ice Age? Do you know what happens to temperatures when an ice age ends? They go up. It's normal. Now, if you want evidence that there is no current man-made global warming, do your own research. Read NASA reports and weather station reports. Read the climate papers of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the American National Weather Service. Read those of the Met Office, the Meteorological Office, the UK's National Weather Service. Read the following scientific papers, written by people from NASA and various universities. Evidence for large decadal variability in the tropical mean radiative energy budget. Evidence for strengthening of the tropical general circulation in the 1990s. We read them after hearing Dr. Kary Mullis talk about them in a TED Talk. That's right, Dr. Mullis from our COVID episodes, the inventor of the PCR test, who died 4 months before all COVID hell broke loose.
The conclusion in both of these papers is that our theories about global warming are completely wrong. If you measure the temperature of the atmosphere, it isn't going up. It's not going up at all. We've been doing it very carefully now for 20 years from satellites, and it isn't going up. The place didn't get warmer, so the theory is complete. But these papers should have been called The End to the Global Warming Fiasco.
Listen to real scientists, the ones who refuse to be in on it for the money, the ones who risk their careers by speaking up and telling us the truth about this huge lie.
Climate has always been changing, but this has nothing to do with man.
A minute, you say this isn't caused by man. How come they're reporting this heat wave is recognised as the worst in 1,000 years of recorded history in Russia? Surely
of course,
man has got something to do with this, hasn't he?
No, nothing to do with it. The only connection is man is here at the same time as the sun and the moon are doing things.
Dr. Corbyn refers to the fact that the climate is a very complex system with a lot of elements that influence the outcome. Solar activity, the phases of the moon, the Earth's tilt, its elliptical orbit around the sun, ocean circulations, changes in salinity, cloud amount, and much more.
These things are dictated by solar activity in the moon. They're nothing to do with mankind, and those who say that are just trying to make money out of it.
Well, how come then so many climate change scientists disagree with you and they get so much support for what they say?
They're on a gravy train, for heaven's sake, then, mate.
The government puts out about $2.5 billion directly for climate research every year. It only gives that money to scientists who will produce scientific results that support the global warming hypothesis of the Democrat Party. So they don't have any choice. If you're going to get the money, you got to support their position. Therefore, 97% of the scientific reports published support global warming. Why? Because those are the ones the government pays for, and that's where the money is. It's real simple, but that doesn't mean it's right. That doesn't make it true. If you get down to the hard, cold facts, there's no question about it. There is no significant man-made global warming now. There hasn't been any in the past, and there's no reason to expect any in the future.
One of my missions is to turn on its head the idea that carbon dioxide is a pollutant and somehow dangerous, when in fact it is the most important nutrient for all life on Earth, and without it this would be a dead planet. Scientific method has not been applied in such a way as to prove that carbon dioxide is causing the Earth to warm. If we had definitive proof that CO2 was causing serious problems, don't you think they would write that down on a piece of paper somewhere so people could read it? They don't have definitive proof, period.
Earlier this year, Dr. John Clauser was asked to talk to young science students in South Korea on how to become a really good scientist. He used his talk to share his opinion about climate change and about the climate gurus of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Your work should be based on careful observations of nature. You must try hard and recognize what I will call an elephant in the room hiding in plain sight. I found an elephant in the room regarding climate change. I believe that the climate change is not a crisis. The current world is literally awash, saturated with pseudoscience, with bad science, with scientific misinformation and disinformation for opportunistic purposes. Because, in my opinion, the IPCC is one of the worst sources of dangerous misinformation. I can confidently say there is no real climate crisis, and that climate change does not cause extreme weather events. Thank you.
When John Kerry presented his so-called evidence that the Earth's temperatures and the CO2 levels in the atmosphere showed identical graphs, he was lying through his teeth.
When there is more carbon dioxide, the temperature gets warmer.
What he didn't tell you is that temperatures rise and fall first. CO2 levels follow. The climate crisis bashers want you to believe it's the other way around. That CO2 levels go up first and that temperatures go up immediately as a result. You don't believe us? Then listen to real experts, like for instance Professor Ian Clark, geologist and Arctic paleoclimatologist.
Here we're looking at the ice core record from Vostok, and in the red we see temperature going up from early time to later time at a very key interval when we came out of a glaciation. And we see the temperature going up, and then we see the CO2 coming up. CO2 lags behind that increase. It's got an 800-year lag, so temperature is leading CO2 by 800 years.
Several other ice surveys show the exact same findings. Why didn't Kerry point that out? Why does the IPCC not talk about this? It kind of changes the narrative, don't you think? The amount of CO2 produced by humans is only a fraction of that produced by nature. Take volcanoes. They produce more carbon dioxide than all the cars, factories, planes, etc. put together. Animals, bacteria and dying vegetation release many hundreds of gigatons of CO2 each year. But the biggest producer of CO2 by far are the oceans. Meet Carl Wunsch, Professor of Oceanography at MIT, Harvard University, University of London, Senior Visiting Fellow in Mathematics and Physics, University of Cambridge, author of 4 major textbooks on oceanography.
The ocean is the major reservoir into which carbon dioxide goes when it comes out of the atmosphere, or from which it is re-emitted to the atmosphere. If you heat the surface of the ocean, it tends to emit carbon dioxide. So similarly, if you cool the ocean surface, the ocean can dissolve more carbon dioxide.
The warmer the oceans, the more CO2 they release. The cooler the oceans, the more CO2 they absorb. So, back to the time lag of 800 years between changes in temperature and changes in CO2 levels. Where does that time lag come from? Oceans are massive. They are so massive it literally takes hundreds of years for them to warm up or cool down.
If somebody says, oh, I'm seeing changes in the North Atlantic, this must mean that the climate system is changing. It may only mean that something happened in a remote part of the ocean decades or hundreds of years ago, whose effects are now beginning to show up in the North Atlantic.
In the past 120 years, temperatures have risen just over half a degree Celsius. But most of their rise occurred before 1940. Since that time, the temperature has fallen for 4 decades and risen for 3 decades. Looking at Earth's long climate history, there is no evidence whatsoever that carbon dioxide has ever determined global temperatures. Not ever. Period. By the way, here are some important numbers we think you should know. 0.04% of our atmosphere consists of CO2. 95.7% of that amount is produced by nature. 4.3% is produced by man. In other words, 0.0017% of our atmosphere is CO2 produced by man. So, what about the differences between the scientific facts and the IPCC's predictions? Let's hear what Professor Clark said at a congressional hearing.
How do they model the greenhouse to achieve these temperatures? Well, CO2 is a very minor constituent of the atmosphere. The strongest, by far, is water vapor. And so water vapor is used in these models to drive climate warming. The model is based on a little bit of CO2 warming, which would be insignificant, is amplified by water vapor, a 2 to 4 time water vapor feedback. And this feedback effect has never been documented, it's never been seen in the geological record, and so it remains an hypothesis.
Now that's a very polite way to say they are spicing up the statistics, because the real data would never show a climate crisis. The problem with these mathematical models is they show you exactly what you put into them. They make it extremely easy to manipulate the outcome and change the narrative. Bearing in mind that the models were set up to serve politics, not science, they predict extreme heat, droughts, food shortages, starvation, natural disasters, and so on and so forth. They now even show preposterous headlines that the planet has entered an era of boiling. This is insane, as none of the scientific data even remotely points in that direction. And they can yell and scream for all we care about this July being the hottest month on record, but there's no evidence of that either. Now, we understand people make mistakes, but these are not mistakes. These are deliberate lies.
Before it is too late, within the 10 years that we have left to us.
The world is going to end in 12 years.
9 years.
There will be no future underwater.
The science is clear.
In the 10 years that we have left to us.
I can't imagine there will be a human on the planet in 10 years.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
They're using mathematical models to predict horror scenarios, just like they did with COVID-19. Remember Neil Ferguson and his 2.2 million people will die in the US alone? Didn't happen. Apart from those murdered with a little help from midazolam and remdesivir. The climate models too are fraudulent, just like these COVID models. Designed that way by fraudulent people and paid for by fraudulent people and subsequently deployed by fraudulent people. The so-called hockey stick effect was created deliberately that way by flattening the curves before the Industrial Revolution, making it seem like a nice and steady line, after which they put totally exaggerated predictions into their models that subsequently sped out this insane graph. We wonder, Mr. Man, what happened to the Little Ice Age? And where did you leave the medieval warming period, And how come IPCC, One World Government Panel on Climate Fraud, how come you want us to freak out over a predicted hotspot of greenhouse warming when the real temperature readings by radio sonde do not show a hotspot? How come they show cooling? Remember those 2 papers we showed you 12 minutes ago? Well, that was just the beginning. Over the past months, we've read just about every scientific paper on climate change written in the past 2 decades, including the ones that are not talked about on TV, that are peer-reviewed and meet the strict requirements of science. What they conclude all boils down to the following. There is no climate crisis. Temperatures have been climbing since the Little Ice Age. Temperatures rise much slower than predicted by the IPCC. CO2 has never determined global temperatures, not ever in the history of our planet. CO2 is not a forging agent, it follows temperatures. Warming is caused by nature and by anthropogenic factors, not by man. There is a direct link between warming and solar activity. Therefore, it's about time that CO2 levels and temperatures are decoupled. The amount of CO2 produced by humans is only a fraction of that produced by nature. CO2 is not a pollutant. It is plant food. It is of the utmost importance for life on Earth. More CO2 means a greener planet and increased yields of crops. Bringing down CO2 levels will have damaging effects for all life on Earth. More CO2 has not increased natural disasters. As a matter of fact, there's ample evidence that many forest fires were caused by man, not nature. Crooked politicians using crooked models to blame everything on global warming and climate change. Oh, and by the way, cold weather kills more people than warm weather. Thousands of scientists from around the world are now stepping forward and speaking up about this huge political fraud, this scam called the climate crisis. They have formed coalitions trying to reach as many people as possible, trying to prevent yet another useless and devastating global lockdown. Clintel is one of them, the Global Climate Intelligence Group. Clintel has released a World Climate Declaration signed by 1,500 scientists and professionals. The title of this declaration speaks for itself. There is no climate emergency. A global network of over 1,500 scientists and professionals has prepared this urgent message. Climate science should be less political, while climate policy should be more scientific. Scientists should openly address uncertainties and exaggerations in their predictions of global warming, while politicians should dispassionately count the real costs as well as the imagined benefits of their policy measures. 1,500 scientists and professionals who know what they're talking about and who refuse to be bribed or bullied into silence. Let's leave it to Dan Peña to say it as it is. In 2009, Mr. Peña and his wife were in a research facility in Antarctica. The scientists gave presentations about climate change. They had drilled thousands of ice cores, by which they can tell you the temperatures at any given time, and had brought about a dozen to this presentation.
So they're going through the second or third core, and they said 275,000 years ago, this was the temperature, blah, 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 blah. And then 55,000 years ago, the world was 2 degrees warmer Celsius than it is today. And I said, well, you mean the whole world? He says, yes. And the poles are only benchmarks. And he said, it's all cyclical.
Mr. Peña then points out something interesting.
The best scenario vis-a-vis global warming is about 10 feet raise in water. If the water on the planet is going to rise up 10 feet, that means the southern part of the United States is gone. England is gone. Most of Europe is gone. Most of Central America is gone. If it were really true, the banks wouldn't invest. The banks wouldn't finance. Not one motherfucking condominium. The financial institutions, the banks of this world know it's not going to happen. Otherwise, you couldn't get a goddamn loan in London. You know those 30, 40-year mortgages? The world will be over by then. It's the greatest fraud that's been perpetrated on mankind this century.
The man has a point. If the climate emergency were true, would the Cabal buy mansions by the sea? You were lied to all along, and the mainstream media was, as always, in on it.
They've already announced in our office that once the public will be open to it, we're going to start focusing mainly on climate, like global warming, and like that's going to be our next focus. Like our focus was to get Trump out of office, right? So our next thing is going to be for climate change awareness.
What does that look like?
I have a feeling it's just going to be like constantly showing videos of like decline in ice and weather warming up and like the effects it's having on the economy and really talking
Who decides that?
the head of the network.
Zucker?
Yeah.
So that's like the next
Pandemic like story like that will beat to death.
So climate change overload.
Be prepared, it's coming.
They lied about temperatures in general. They manipulated people by using new colors, red and orange. They lied about the skyline effect, adding warm buildings at night into the equation, making it look warmer. They lied by using feels-like temperatures instead of real ones. They lied by making you believe humans are much more to blame for CO2 than volcanoes and oceans and even decomposing leaves in autumn. They lied by telling you rising CO2 levels cause temperatures to rise, when in reality it's the other way round. They lied by claiming climate change causes health problems. They lied using fraudulent climate models. They lied about there being a scientific consensus when there is none. And they deliberately silenced thousands of scientists who are trying to shout off the rooftops that there is no climate emergency. Other scientists are, to use Piers Corbyn's words, on the gravy train. Or to use this lady's words, many scientists are in the UN's pocket.
You know, we own the science and we think that the world, should know it.
Glad to hear some Cabal puppets are honest people. She adds that the UN also controls social media and that they're doing their utmost best to remove disinformation about the climate at all times.
We partnered with Google, for example. If you Google climate change, you will, at the top of your search, you will get all kinds of UN resources. We started this partnership when we were shocked to see that when we Googled climate change, we were getting incredibly distorted information right at the top.
The mainstream media does the rest by spreading lie after lie after lie, until everybody is too brainwashed to have a different opinion. But like we said, when you simply do your own research, it's not that hard to see through their bullshit. When you see this, ask yourself the question, what study? What scientists? Find names and follow the money. On whose payroll are they? So whom do they represent? Ask yourself, why is it not allowed to have a different opinion? One that can actually be defended with scientific facts instead of vague claims. Why are those who state there's no climate emergency called climate change deniers? Why should they be ignored? Why are they ridiculed, ousted by their peers? Why is fear being normalized? Why are we supposed to listen to a child instead of climatologists with amazing credentials?
Since the climate crisis doesn't exist, how can we expect people to want climate action?
Once you see through the bullshit, it almost becomes entertaining. Europe is the fastest warming continent in the world. No, it's not Europe, it's the Arctic. No, it's Africa. Of course it's Africa. Oh, hang on, it's the Middle East. It's always hot in the Middle East. Or was that Africa? Aha! It turns out to be the US. Well, at least part of the US. It's New England. No! It's Russia! It is always Russia. The entire climate hysteria is a fraud. Just like the COVID fraud, the Russian collusion fraud, and all the other frauds. They are there for only one reason: to keep you scared and thus oppressed. Why? So they can push their Agenda 2030 down our throats, including land and home expropriations, the destruction of our food sector, and the implementation of tri-state and 15-minute cities. The climate emergency was fabricated to turn us into prisoners in a totalitarian one-world regime. What they didn't count on, though, were the critical thinkers, those who did their own research and who refused to be silenced against all odds. Do you want to see where all of this will lead us? Then follow me to part 29.